Hello, my name is Leah. It is time once again for a quarterly review. We have reached the end of quarter two. We're halfway through 2021. I feel like this year is making up for how long 2020 dragged on by speeding by and not existing at all. So it's gonna be a hectic one. In the middle of this quarter, I decided to change a lot of my big plans for the year. You know, reworking all of my plans is always fun, which means that I feel like this quarterly review is going to look very much like I didn't do anything, but it's really just that my time and efforts were shifted elsewhere. But I will get into all the details of that. First, I would like to kind of go through my process for evaluating how I did in the last quarter and using that information to set myself up for what I want to accomplish in quarter three. First, we'll do a little review. In my quarter one review video, I listed the stuff that I wanted to accomplish in quarter two as finish Project Shadow's revisions by April 30th, aka the end of Camp NaNoWriMo. Send that draft to beta readers. And then while Project Shadows is being read by beta readers, start prepping to write Project Bone and draft that story in June, which I mistakenly thought was camp in that video, so the whole time I'm sitting there saying June is Camp NaNoWriMo. It's definitely July. I was immediately called out in the comments, as I rightfully should have been. So, if you've been following along with my channel, you know that I accomplished none of those. But let's go through a little bit and try to see where we went wrong along the way. First of all, I made a mistake that I literally addressed in my quarter one video about not really understanding my own work speed for revising and therefore setting unrealistic goals. Yeah, the April 30th was unrealistic. I had half of the book to finish still, and I thought I could do all of it in 1 month, even though it had taken me January, February, and March to finish the first half. Now, my pace did definitely increase a lot in April because I was not taking any freelance clients for that month, so I was solely focusing on my writing, and I did get a huge chunk into that second half of the book. But if I would have taken like 2 more seconds to actually think about that goal, I would have said, wait, no, that's probably not going to happen. Because if I wanted to reach that goal, I would have had to have revised over a chapter a day. And I had already realized at that point that 1 chapter a day is not quite the pace that I work at. Specifically for this project and what was involved in revising it, I was getting about 3/4 of a chapter a day, like almost finishing it, but not quite finishing a chapter. So just thinking about the pacing for 2 seconds longer would have made me realize that that was already an unrealistic goal. Then because Project Shadow stretched on longer past April, I didn't end up getting to Project Bone at all. It's still, you know, circling in the back of my mind. I do still plan to get to that project eventually, but I'll get into that more whenever I talk about what my new plans are. So we've gone over what the goals were. Now let's take a moment to talk about what I actually did work on in quarter two. So first, again, Project Shadows. To update you where I am on that, I wrote 30,195 words of revisions during quarter two, the bulk of that being during Camp NaNoWriMo, which brings my total for the document to 66,083 words. For reference, my goal for the whole draft was about 82,000. I was right at the end of Act 2, getting ready to break into Act 3. I did continue working on this project into May, but I kind of set it to the side for multiple reasons. One of those reasons was the other thing that I was working on in quarter two, which is my freelance work. So I worked on 6 full-length novels as a part of my editing work during quarter two, which is a lot of books. I won't go into too much detail here just so I'm not like being repetitive, because next week I'm going to be posting a 6 months on Fiverr update video. But in the second half of May and into June, I was working basically full-time on my freelance work, which meant that my personal projects kind of got pushed to the side for a moment. And then the last big thing I did in quarter two brings me to the introduction of why I am changing my plans for the year. Just for context, I said this in my last video and I said this in my 2021 goals video, but this year for me is about building foundations. Specifically in these videos, I'm talking about like my writing and my work. So for my writing career, my goal with this year is to really work on developing my skills as a writer and setting myself up through practice, learning about how publishing works, and in the stuff that I'm actually creating, I'm wanting to set myself up for a successful author career. So originally, the way that I kind of was doing that was focusing a lot on Project Shadows. The purpose of this being, I wanted to go through the whole process, drafting, revising, polishing, all of that, with the hopes that I can query that book next year. I had some things kind of mixed in there, like the Project Bone thing, but those were really things to fill my time while I was waiting for feedback. Most of the year, my focus was going to be on Project Shadows. I feel so far like I've made a lot of really good progress in my revisions, but kind of in the middle of May, as I was reaching the end of that draft, I was starting to get frustrated because something just wasn't working. Like I couldn't place my finger on what it was. There was an energy that was lacking in it. It's an energy that I felt in the beginning, but that has slowly kind of petered out as the story went on. Around this time that I was starting to feel frustrated with Project Shadows, I decided to go back and watch one of my old vlogs from whenever I was working on Project Fire, which, for those of you who don't know, is the book that I drafted in 2018. It's the first book that I've finished a complete first draft, it's like a rough zero draft. But I watched the vlog and I was like, wow, she looks so happy with her life. And then I decided to read the first few chapters of Project Fire. It was so much better. There was an energy, a life, a soul, if you will, in those first few chapters that I just wasn't feeling in Project Shadows. But as this is the year of Foundations, I didn't want to switch projects just because I was bored. Part of Foundations is the follow through. It's the pushing through to finish the draft. So I sat down with myself and was like, okay, practically, what would it mean if I switched projects? It would definitely mean taking a step back because Project Fire is a whole hot mess. Project Shadows is definitely a lot more polished and a lot more structurally sound than Project Fire is. It wouldn't even be a revision at that point. It's literally just starting from scratch, essentially. On the other hand, I do feel like I'm more tapped into Project Fire's characters. Even though I've worked on Project Shadows longer, I feel like I know the characters in Project Fire better, weirdly enough. In terms of publishing, Project Shadows is the first of a trilogy, and there's the whole thing about standalone with series potential. There would be too much of Project Shadows that would need to change. It would be too damaging to the story for me to try to force it into being a standalone. So I kind of had just accepted that this one wasn't going to be a standalone with series potential. Project Fire, on the other hand, does have that potential. I originally planned it to be a duology, but since I had passed the novel, I had absolutely no actual plan. I just, in my mind, had like a couple threads that I didn't resolve, but they could easily be resolved in book 1. And then I have some ideas on how it could be carried out into a book 2, but those ideas don't need to happen necessarily. And then the really big thing, the thing that I think is the deciding factor in all of this is that Project Fire has a voice that Project Shadows simply doesn't. The narrator for Project Fire is a lot more voicey, it's a lot more engaging, I guess maybe is the word. There's several things that are included in chapter 1 of that are very hooky elements to Project Fire, but Project Shadows takes a second to kind of rev up. The narrator in that book isn't quite as voicey, and the big moment doesn't happen until like chapter 3. All of that considered, I've come to the decision that Project Fire is probably the better book to query or debut with. Which brings me to my quarter 3 plans. So my process in goal setting is always to bring it back to the why of why I'm doing stuff. As I mentioned, foundations, which means we take where we failed in quarter 2, combine it with where we want to go, and see how those two things can inform what we're actually going to do in the next quarter. Since Project Fire is my new focus, I'm going to be spending most of quarter 3 focusing on that. Like I said, I have a very, very, very rough draft from 2018, but I'm essentially starting from the beginning again. We're throwing most of that away and working on a better, clearer, more engaging story. I've spent the past few weeks of quarter 2 working on some prep work for that using Story Genius. I will be talking more about this book very soon. That, I guess, was the part that I kind of skipped over in the What Have I Been Doing section. So in these last few days of June, I would like to wrap up some of that prep work. I know some of it will be continuing into July, but basically I want to start actually writing in July for Camp Nano. And my goal is going to be 20,000 words. I do have 2 more editorial projects to do in July, so that's going to take some of my time and why I'm not pushing too much harder, because again, realistic expectations. Then in August, I'm going to aim for 35,000 words. I have 1 editorial project booked for August right now. And then lastly, in September, for the end of quarter 3, I would like to wrap up Project Fire. I'm gonna shoot for about 80,000 words for this draft. Normally my first drafts ring in at about 60,000 words, but I feel like for this one, since it has been a story in my mind for so long, it's more fleshed out than my typical, first draft. So I'm gonna shoot for 80,000, and then hopefully in September I can send it to beta readers. In summary, my goals for quarter 3 are write a book. It's seriously so wild to me that the year is almost halfway over. How? I don't understand it. Hopefully, I can get my act together in quarter 3, because I feel like the past 2 quarters just simply have not gone as planned. The first one being because of unrealistic expectations, and the second one being kind of because of that, and also just because priorities have shifted, and that's okay. That's the good thing, I think, about breaking your big yearly goals down. It gives you manageable chunks to work with, but it also gives you the flexibility to pivot and shift to something else if you feel like either what you're doing isn't working or you want to do something else instead. So I don't feel like I'm failing on my yearly goal of finish Project Shadows, because my yearly goal wasn't really finish Project Shadows. The real goal is to be consistently writing, to be setting myself up to have a successful author career, to be taking steps towards that, and although this sort of is a step back in some ways, it's definitely a step forward in terms of reaching my goal. So that is all I have for you today. Let me know down below what sort of stuff you are planning to accomplish in quarter 3, whether it's writing related or not. Let me know. I'd love to chat about goals with everyone. Let's see us succeed. Let's see us do the thing. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again soon.